Lesson 5.2, Comparing Rational Numbers. Now, equivalent fractions are fractions that represent the same rational number. For example, 1/2 is the same as 2/4, which is the same as 3/6, which is the same as 4/8. They all represent the same amount of a picture. So if we were to draw a rectangle, and we cut the rectangle in half, this part of the rectangle would be equivalent to 1/2. At the same time, I could also split the rectangle this way, and now we have 2/4 is the same as 1/2. That's just an example of what an equivalent fraction is. Now, if I gave you 2/3 and I asked you to find an equivalent fraction, all you do is multiply the numerator and the denominator by the same number. So if we multiply by 3/3, the new fraction would end up being 6/9. If I take that same 2/3 and I multiply it by 7, I would now end up with 14/21. That would be equivalent fractions. So right now, pause the video, and I would like you to find two equivalent fractions for 5/8 by multiplying by 3 and by multiplying by 5. Okay, if we multiply it by 3, we end up with 15/24. And then if I multiply it by 5/5, I end up with 25/40. All of those fractions are equivalent. 5/8, 15/24, and 25/40 are all the same fraction, or the same value. Okay, now, when we're trying to find a common denominator, you can use your LCM in order to find a common denominator. So if we have 5/6 and we have 7/8, if we use our factor ladder that we've learned before, we can divide 2 into 6 goes 3 times, 2 into 8 is 4 times. Nothing goes into 3 and 4, so the numbers here on the outside are what we would use to find our common denominator. Your common denominator would be 24. So each of the fractions would be set equal to 24. Now, in order to find the numerator, you figure out what you did on the bottom. So 6 times what gives us 24? The answer is 4. So I now do the same thing to the top, and I do 5 times 4, and I get 20. On the bottom, I would do 8 times 3 is 24, so 7 times 3 is 21. So now we have equivalent fractions. We can compare, if we needed to, 20/24 and 21/24. We can now tell which fraction is bigger because they both have the same denominator. The one with the higher numerator ends up being the larger fraction. In this case, 21 is larger than 24, so 7/8 would be your larger fraction. Now, pause the video and try to find a common denominator for 5/8 and 3/4. This one is a little easier than the first one because 4 goes into 8, so your common denominator is 8. So we can leave this fraction as 5/8. This one, however, has to change. Well, 4 goes into 8 2 times, so 2 times 3 is 6. And now we can look and compare 6/8 and 5/8. And 5/8 is definitely less than 6/8 because 6 is greater than 5. Now, cross products is another way to find out which answer is larger. We multiply each numerator by the other denominator and always put the answer above the numerator. For example, if we do the first example here, we'd multiply going up. 6 times 7 is 42. 8 times 5 is 40. So the answer that is bigger is the 7/8. Now, pause the video and try the next problem. Okay, we multiply going up, so 8 times 3 is 24. 4 times 5 is 20. 24 is larger, therefore 5/8 is less than 3/4. And I'm sorry, on the other problem we forgot to put the symbol. 5/6 is less than 7/8. So what we want to do is find out whether or not these fractions are equivalent. Multiply going up. Do 16 times 33, which comes out to 528. Do 40 times 13, which comes out to 520. Since the numbers are not equal, the fractions are not equal either, and they're not equivalent. Now pause the video and do 6/7 and 78/91. Are they equivalent? Do they come out to the same value? Seven times 78 gives you 546. 91 times 6 gives you 546. Since both numbers came out the same, they are equal, so yes, they are equivalent. Okay, now, sometimes you'll be given a group of fractions and being asked to put them in order from least to greatest. Since we are doing pre-algebra, anytime we put them in order from least to greatest, we use a less than sign in between the numbers. But in order to put them in order, we need to find a common denominator. We need to find a number that 3, 4, 2, 8, and 6 all go into. So take a moment and think about your times tables and see if you can figure out what your denominator would be. If you start by using the largest number and counting by the largest number, you should be able to find your denominator. Well, if we count by 8s, 3 does not go into 8. The next number when you count by 8s is 16. Does 3 go into 16 evenly? No, it does not. Continue. The next number counting by 8s is 24. Well, 3 goes into 24 evenly, 4 goes into 24 evenly, 2 goes into 24 evenly, and so does 6. So your common denominator is now 24. So you need to write 24 for each one of those fractions. We have 5 fractions. We should have 5 numbers with denominators of 24. Now, 3 goes into 24 8 times, so 8 times 2 is 16. 4 goes into 24 6 times, 6 times 1 is 6. 2 goes into 24 12 times, 12 times 1 is 12. 8 goes into 24 3 times, 3 times 7 is 21. 6 goes into 24 4 times, 4 times 5 is 20. Now you can look at all of the numerators to determine the order of the fractions. When you do the order of the fractions, however, you need to make sure that you're listing them according to the original numbers that you were given. So these two numbers are equivalent. These are equivalent. And if you'll notice, I'll continue the grouping so that you can see which fractions are equivalent. All right, so now let's put them in order. Well, it's apparent that 6/24 is the lowest one. Well, 6 is equivalent to 1/4. So 1/4 is our first number. Then we put our less than sign. Well, after the 6 comes the 12. Well, 12 is equivalent to 1/2. After the 1/2 comes the 16/24, which is 2/3. Inequality sign. The next one is 20/25, which is the same as 20/24, excuse me. And then we use our inequality sign, and the last one is 21/24, which is equivalent to 7/8. That concludes our video for today. Make sure you list any questions that you have, and we will go over them in class tomorrow.